here we are with some real stories in teaching with Lucas Gaffey. Lucas, can you shed a little light on where you teach, for how long, what subject, what age groups, all that kind of stuff, so people have a feel for where you sit in that teaching profession?
Yeah, so I've been teaching now for 17 years. The entire time I've been within the Seattle Public Schools district and also the entire time in high school, so grades 9 through 12. My endorsements are in physics and math, so I've taught basically all math subjects and physics along with physical science, which is like ninth grade science, and a couple others here and there, like astronomy. So kind
Okay.
of been all over the hard sciences and math.
Okay, awesome. What drew you into teaching in the first place? How did you actually get your start in this profession and say, yes, this is what I'm going to go do?
So my older brother, my half brother, who's 9 years older than me, one of my most fun memories from high school was having him be my substitute teacher. And he's just hilarious, and everybody thought he was great. And that happened a couple of times. So, you always look up to your older brother, and you thought, well, if he can do it, that's a path for me at some point. And my interests coming out of high school were math and physics. Like that's what I was drawn to. That's what I enjoyed. I didn't like writing papers or doing a lot of stuff, but working in a lab and solving problems I always found to be fun and also typically kind of came easily to me. So I appreciated that. So I just kind of went in that direction and thought, well, I'm just going to go in this direction. And also I could always teach. And I kind of liked the idea of stand-up comedy as well was something, but I never quite had the guts to try. So I feel like you take like physics background, comedy background, and you get science teacher.
Awesome. And what's kept you in it for that amount of time, or maybe more directly? So you've got this older brother who you saw teach when you were in junior high, high school. You thought that might be fun. How did that bridge stay connected through like, yes, I'm going to now be a teacher? And then ultimately, what's kept you doing it for 17 years? What keeps you coming back?
Well, getting into it, it took me a while. I moved around a lot after high school and ended up bouncing back to Seattle where I am now because my mom was ill and I just had to cut college short where I was going to Eastern. I was really close to my physics degree. Originally, I was going in for physics, like a physics endorsement and a bachelor's in education. Chopped that short and came to Seattle and just got a physics, bachelor in physics, and then kind of wanted to be around my mom as she was near the end. And then with that, I was like, well, what can I do now? I was working at a Japanese restaurant where you could continue to work there and live in the city. But I was like, the teaching idea is here. It's a short, the school I went to, Seattle University, it was 4 quarters. It was kind of expensive, but it was only 4 quarters. You're out, teach your certificate, they help you find a job. That idea of you're trained to do a job, you don't just graduate with some degree and you're like, now what do I do? This is like, you're trained for something. Here will help you get a job. And boom, once I was in, even though it's very nerve wracking the first couple of years, I sort of have a feel for it. And you see it in the profession. There are some people who just aren't really comfortable in front of 25 to 35 kids talking. And even though I was a relatively shy younger person, when you're talking to younger people, at least for me, it's a lot easier, especially if you know what you're talking about. It came easy. And the kids, I'm lucky to have a reasonable sense of humor. Kids enjoyed the classes. And that's another thing is I usually get a lot of positive feedback from students. Everybody likes to hear nice things, so that's another draw. Like if you're hearing positive things, it's easy to come back. One of the highlights about teaching that a lot of people mention is you get a fresh start every year. So if you have a bad year and you're like, oh man, I'm not sure about this, you might be teaching a whole different subject the final year. Like if you're a math teacher, for instance, you might go from teaching algebra 1 in ninth graders to pre-calculus and seniors the next year. It's tough to just after one year be like, that's it and be done when the next year has so many possibilities.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to some of that maybe first couple years and advice for younger teachers here in a second. But
Mm.
first, I also want to highlight this concept of when you hear good feedback, it tends to lead you to keep going. Where if you don't hear that feedback, maybe you're like, I don't know if I'm good. I don't know if people actually like this. So I do want to
Right.
highlight that as just general advice out there for people listening is like when you see someone do a good job, just please tell them. Like just
Yeah.
please give them that affirmation and that feedback that you
Yeah.
appreciate what they're doing and they're doing a good job because it typically does go a really long way.
Yeah.
Um,
It does. It sticks with you.
been doing this for 17 years, kind of hard sciences, math, played all across different levels of high school. But still, even after that, is there anything in particular that's energizing you at work? Like after you've been doing this for so long, What is there to still keep looking forward to or try or do differently, or what maybe is energizing you kind of looking forward in the next, say, 12 months, 3 months, pick your time frame.
So as far as thinking about this is, oh, there's got to be some sort of repetitiveness over, 17 years. Granted, each year is different. And part of that you kind of like that way it saves you some planning. You're like, okay, I know what's coming up next. However, been in the game as long as I have, I'm seeing like the generational shift in just youth in
Yeah.
general. So it's interesting to see how much things have changed. When I was first teaching, kids probably thought of me as that like fun young teacher. And I have now become this older guy who has no idea what they're talking about. And they're like, oh, did you see this on the flip flam? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about on your phone.
So I guess
Where
is
was
that
I
what you're
going?
looking forward to? You want to download the Flim Flam app and be
See where things lead. Like, for instance, we got a brand new math curriculum I'd like to see that be changed. I'd like to be an agent of that change. And it has some good things and some so things. I'd like to see those sort of merge with our older stuff and changes in the curriculum that I'd like to pursue and have happen. And not only that, it's fun to see what new teachers we get. There's actually a fair amount of turnover, and working with new people is always good. But I guess just kind of seeing what happens with this next generation and how things change.
awesome. And as you look back on that 17-year career in this profession, I'm curious to uncover some stories, fun ones, wild ones, proud ones. So I'm curious as you look back, does anything stand out as a coolest, most enjoyable, or proudest moment, or something that, when you think about it, you kind of still smile or light up because, the outcome was just so good that maybe you or your team or one of your students did something that just made you feel so proud or made you light up. Does anything come to mind?
I think a lot of people get into this for the relationship building idea. Not only are you building relationships with kids, and I happen to live in this part of town now, so it's kids in my community, and you feel like you're making a positive contribution to society here. So you get that kind of bonus from the job. A lot of teachers, when you ask them this question, it would be about hearing from students later on. Even people I know who are elementary school teachers, like fifth grade teachers, will tell me how a kid reached out to them when they were in high school. But for me, being in high school, it's students reaching out to me or running into them in public, years later when they're in their 20s or something like that. Or some have a couple of the best ones were kids emailing me from college and telling me that they had chosen to become physics majors because of, the excitement they had in my class and how fun they found it. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's really great. And
Yeah.
one kid I had he was actually one of my first students, my first year, came back. And this is something I tell kids every year is it was in the ninth grade science class. And this is like high school is like a dog park, but for kids. You just really need to grow up and learn how to communicate. And that's what this is about. And the kid actually took that to heart, apparently, because he ended up becoming student body president. And then the last week of school, when he was a senior, he came in on the final day before, because the seniors leave a little early, came and found me. I was in this science lab doing this photography unit. Came into the dark room and was just like, Gaffey, I got to tell you, I remember what you said freshman year, and I took it to heart, and I've just been, and he became this very like outgoing public person, and stuff like that sticks with you. I get running into kids or kids on graduation coming up and saying things to you, and it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. How about anything look back of just wild, crazy, I can't believe that actually happened, or that person said this, or does anything stand out as just like,
I mean, kids say the darndest things, so you get a lot of kooky stuff being said in the classroom. But as a science teacher, you automatically always have the, oh yeah, I set off the fire alarm. So things of that nature. All kinds of labs gone wrong. We didn't know we were going to be on strike until the day before school, or like the evening. So I'd already had a lab set up involving balloons. And one of the things is you take a lighter to a balloon full of air, it pops immediately. But if you take a lighter to a balloon filled with water, like a water balloon, you got to hold it there for a little while so you can kind of scare the kids. And I'd put it over a kid's head. However, when it's been sitting in a sink filled with water for a week, it's
hmm,
deteriorating the outer edge. So I put this over a kid's head and it just burst all over him on day one of school. So this kid had to go through,
all
the rest
day?
of his high school like covered in water. I was like, oh, sorry, man. And then like the old magnesium and dry ice setting it on fire and then having the whole school have to clear out because the fire alarm went off. Yeah, stuff like that. And then kids just have some wild ideas, which have, with the advent of the internet, and that being more prominent in kids' lives, you think they would come to class already knowing stuff, but instead they come to class with wild misconceptions like, I heard the earth was flat and stuff like that, that you have to listen to.
Are there any particularly tough times or tough moments? And if so, like how do you handle those and how do you bounce back? Because right in every profession, like it's not always just great and the kids are awesome and I had such a great day
Right.
and a great month and a great year. There's always these kind of tough times. Anything strike you and how do you handle that or navigate that or bounce back?
So for me, and a lot of teachers, one of the things that's toughest to deal with are sometimes you'll get a struggling student slash difficult parent combination.
Yeah.
And that can be tough. Like I've had some emails that were just like, vitriol coming right at me, just like,
Yeah.
where is this coming from? And at those times, that's when you lean on your coworkers. You can be like, hey, can you come read this? And what are your thoughts? And then hopefully if you've built the community, everyone's working together. So just got to lean on your colleagues and you hope like 90% of my career, I've had very supportive, helpful admin. Like the people evaluating me have been very helpful, and I could go to them with questions. So in those times, just lean on your coworkers, and hopefully you've got some positive admin there that can help you with it. Other than a couple of years where things got a little, there was transition at the old school I was at, and we got some new people in there. So I've actually had a great admin team.
Yeah, and to dig in maybe a little bit more on this, struggling student, angry email sent your way. Any advice for a younger teacher? Okay, great to go ask your other teachers, what do you think? Am I misinterpreting this? Are you seeing something similar with this particular student, or how have you handled? But can you just
Yeah.
walk us through maybe an example? How do you turn that angry email into how do we get past this? Like, are you going to get an angry email
Right.
every week? How have you handled maybe one of those circumstances?
So typically, and this has been pretty common, is I'm very accommodating. I'm not like, if you draw a line in the sand and you're like, this is what, granted, it's good to have expectations, but all students are different, have different abilities, and we need to meet them where they are and try and get them through this. So if you're just drawing a line and like everybody has to do this, you're probably going to lose that. So you need to be pretty flexible, but you got to be able to say, okay, here, I'm going to help this kid. And at the end of the day, you're trying to help the kids. I just had a colleague a couple of weeks ago get a pretty brutal email. Like we are required as part of our contract every 2 weeks to email all the kids' parents who have D's or E's, which is like failing grade in the class, and let them know. It's like we need to show that we have been reaching out. And so a parent got fed up and was just like, yes, I know this kid has some struggles. And then, well, maybe if you would teach this way, and maybe if you did this, and maybe you did this, and maybe my student would be more engaged and care more. And it's just, you have to take a breath and maybe don't fire off that email immediately, type something up, ask your colleague what's going on. But yeah, in every occasion, it ends up going forward. I've never had an instance where a student needed to be removed from my class or something like that due to me, maybe other students. But in the case of other colleagues, who it's where they were just like, this is absolutely what this kid has to do. I will not accommodate anything. And, you can make an argument for that teacher because there should be these rigid standards, but chances are, especially with the parents, how things have changed in the last 17 years, they're going to fight for everything for their kid. And I've had parents stick up for kids who have been caught cheating and then tell the admin, they're like, no, my kid, even though there's evidence, like clear
Yeah.
evidence of this, and then be like, no, my kid, they need to be forward and they need to be able to retake and get an A, even though they cheated on stuff. So
Yeah, on that balance, then, can you maybe give one specific example of what's something that you accommodated or bent on for a student? Obviously, you're not accommodating like, yeah, I saw that person cheat, but you're right, they do deserve to get an A. You're not going to bend on something like that. What is a specific example where, as a result of one of these difficult conversations or emails, you're like, okay, we'll do this for your student? Any particular examples?
it might be allowing for a note card, like on a test or something like that, even though there hasn't been a specific diagnosis of some kind of need for this, like an issue with short-term memory or some kind of cognition issue. But they've always had it before, and this is what they're used to. And without sounding snarky here, it's not like allowing this is going to get some kid into Stanford ahead of someone else. At the end of the day, it's not ruining some other kid's life because this kid got this accommodation.
Yeah, gotcha.
So as they say in a lot of things, you got to pick your battles. What do you choose to put all of your energy into when this job has a million other things you got to do? So is
Yeah.
this something you're going to, spend days stressing about to deal with?
Yeah. On that note, is there anything that you have consistently done or maybe have not done in your career over 17 years that maybe you see other people do or don't do that you're like, this seems to work for me. I'm surprised more people don't do this. Anything that just seems to work particularly well for you?
As far as the attitude, that is one thing, but that's something that's hard to say, like, hey, be like me. But as far as the technical things, this started basically going into the pandemic, 2020. Schools were shut down, and I had only taught math 1 year prior to that. I'd been all science for like 10 years in a row. And then I was in math again right before the pandemic. And so schools are shut down. And so I decided to make all the lessons. I made them in PowerPoints and I put in animations such that a kid could click through it and see like step by step by step, which is different than if I just wrote down some math steps and then scanned it and put it up. This was like click the space bar. Next things would kind of go through and show you instead of just sort of looking at it. And so I made all these PowerPoints. It took a lot of time and uploaded them. It worked out pretty well, but then I had those PowerPoints ready for next year and the next year. So that's what I still do. And whenever I have a subject, I take the time to make these very involved ones and then I upload them to our online. We have a website called Schoology where kids will go to get whatever like resources. Here's the notes for today. Here's what we did. Here's a PowerPoint. And so I actually have a lot of kids who really appreciate it, especially ones who there's a lot of kids. I don't know if you've read about this profession, but chronic absences has been a huge thing, especially since this pandemic. Like the percentage of students who are chronically absent, which I think means like more than 10% or 15%, something like that, whatever, of a school year, it's just exploded. So kids are always gone. So they can just open up this PowerPoint and click through it. Some will come to class, pull out their computers, and just go through it as I go through it, and it helps them. And not only that, once I do this, the front loading, if I teach the same subject next year, I just have to maybe do a couple little tweaks here and there, and then my day is
Yeah,
I'm
you're done.
planned out. So yeah, I don't, and I've shared these with people, and not only that, so with math, you're often taking like a clunky, you know, like big old whiteboard, not a whiteboard pen like a marker, but they write like digitally on a board, with like a smart pen on a board, and it looks like crap unless you have amazing like calligraphy, smooth handwriting. It it doesn't look very good, and then they'll take a PDF of that, upload it, and I'm like, well, that's nice, but it's hard to
I
read.
can't read.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and not only that, you're up at the board doing this for however many times a day you have that subject. Whereas I spend the time and do this, and I'll even share it. I'm like, hey, do you want this? No, I don't know. I'm like, okay, and I still will write on the board, but I just don't have to do it as much, and it saves a ton of time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kids appreciate it.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, and I got a couple more just kind of quick hitter questions to wrap up as you look back. But kind of most of these are more around advice for folks who are younger teachers or maybe those thinking about getting into this profession. If you go back, what's the number one piece of advice you'd give to yourself, maybe in your first 1 or 2 or 3 years teaching, knowing what you know now? Or what advice would you give to somebody else who's thinking about getting in this profession, or maybe they're in their first year? So what could you share in your 17 years of wisdom, looking back to share with others early in their career, or maybe thinking about entering this profession?
So to a younger person, if I was talking to myself, this more has to do with my own personality. Is I'm a very laid back, go with the flow kind of person. Whereas I would watch other people who are a little more aggressive come in and be more demanding about what they wanted to teach. For instance, if I had my druthers, I'd be teaching AP physics, and higher level, like with older kids. Like I really like the subject and I want to teach kids who frankly have the ability to comprehend and move forward with that subject matter.
Yeah.
But I also, enjoyed doing other things. So I spent 10 years in a row teaching ninth grade physical science, all periods,
Yeah.
which was fine. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people I worked with. One thing would be speak up. Like
Yeah.
because I watched a new guy come into the building and be like, I'm going to create this course and I want to teach these things. And then got that, you know?
Oh, okay.
So
So the advice for yourself isn't necessarily how you change in the classroom
Yeah,
and make sure
right,
that that's
correct.
very well. Okay.
Yeah, be prepared to be flexible. You're not going to get necessarily everything you want going in, especially if you're a first year teacher. If you're new in the building, older teachers be like, okay, this guy gets the tough classes, which are
Yeah.
typically younger kids or kids who struggle a lot. They figure younger people have more energy, they can deal with this kind of thing. So be prepared for a first, hard couple of years, but also people will be supportive. Like one of the things that if you do your grading quickly, whether you're a harsh grader or not, but if you grade quickly and upload the grades within a day or two, kids
Yeah.
really appreciate it, and parents appreciate it, and administrators appreciate it. So
Yeah.
be on top of your stuff, even though grading is everyone's least favorite part. Teaching typically, do it and just get it done. With someone who's like thinking of this as maybe a second career, because I've had a few student teachers over the year, and one was a middle-aged woman, probably in her 50s, who had two sons graduate high school. She was a scientist, like worked for some like geological water survey place where she would go and test water around the Pacific Northwest. She was always telling me how her two sons were brilliant and they're always bored in school, and she was going to come in and get these kids excited. And then she was just so shocked to see that, oh, I think my sons were full of it. Like they were just not, they were just goofing off in class. It wasn't that they were bored. She was seeing how 90% of the students didn't pay attention to her. Very few were excited about the geologic samples she would bring in the show. It was very eye-opening for her to try and get a kid, because a lot of people will go in and be like, I want them to see physics or chemistry or whatever, social studies, humanities, in the way that I see it, and like be
Yeah.
excited about it. And then it can be kind of devastating to see 2 out of 30 kids be interested in what you're saying into like a lesson that you put your heart into and you're really all about, and
Yeah.
28 of them don't care. You got to be able to take that and not be, discouraged when you see that a lot of kids don't necessarily like the things you like.
Yeah. So maybe don't set yourself up for failure by assuming that you're going to be so darn good that all 28 out of 28 are going to be
Yeah,
hanging on every word that you say.
you're not
Like,
going to be.
awesome, but like maybe couch those expectations of if you can have a great impact on 2 or 5 or 10, or maybe in some years it might be a tough year and it's one, like
Yeah,
you can find your one person that year and really make sure that
yeah,
that's the one who can warrant your energy. What's
yeah.
a super common maybe trap that you see first or second or third or early teachers kind of fall into, and how do they avoid any maybe common traps that you see people fall into?
So and you'll hear this on the news whenever there's a story about teaching. The word they use all the time is burnout, and I feel like it's a lesson that every teacher needs to learn on their own. But I mean, the way I attacked grading when I was first teaching versus the way I do it now is completely different. So, and I think they kind of teach this now in school, but I would grade everything meticulously and give lots of feedback, and it would
Oh
take a
yeah.
long time. And this is
Yeah.
in science class. Yeah. My wife's uncle is actually paid at another school district to help grade English papers. I'm sure it's hell for them, such that they hire outside people to help. But regardless, I would do a lot of that, include feedback just to see a kid take, like, throw it in the garbage and you never look at anything. So
Yeah.
learn where to shave off things that you might feel like you're doing a disservice, but learn the places where you can save yourself time and energy. It is an exhausting career. You're on your feet, you're constantly talking. You can only go to the bathroom when you have your little nuggets of
I
time.
never really thought about that.
Yeah. So it's not like a regular job where if I need to use the restroom, I'm going to go now. You have to wait until,
Yeah.
you might only have 5 minutes and you got to run down the hall, come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What to you is the best thing about this profession?
Everyone's going to say the relationships you build, the memories you make with kids, and that's nice. But frankly, the schedule is pretty great. Like
Yep.
the two things are, at the end of the day, you go into the office 185 days a year and you don't have to go in 180 days a year. So that's pretty sweet. And not only that, which I think I mentioned before, every year is a new year. Like it's like a 1 year contract. Maybe the next year isn't as good as the last, but oftentimes they're about the same or better. If you had a bad year, you can look forward to maybe a new year. Maybe you're teaching a different subject. It's a brand new year every year. And that's another big benefit. So, and mentioning that time off, it's not like, for instance, my wife, we go on vacation a lot, we have to travel. When we're off, everybody's off. So
Yeah.
there's no buildup of work at the end of it.
And on the other end of that coin, what's the single worst thing about this profession? Like, what's the one thing you're like, I wish this could change?
I would say in 80% of the country, they would say the pay. You
Yeah.
know, I feel like we're paid pretty reasonably here in Seattle or and in the Puget Sound area. So maybe just the way education is looked at in some sense, it's sort of a, I don't know, underappreciated. Well, you get the two sides. Like you have this group of society that is like, we stand for our teachers, educators, blah, blah, blah. They're great. And then you get the other half that was like, these are just babysitters who get paid a ton and don't do anything. So you can't really change people's viewpoints, but it's just sort of the, I don't know, the way education has been looked at. And frankly, some of that is education's fault. There are some things going on that are not great. I would wager that the vast majority of teachers would say the pay, the
Yeah.
benefits, but
But it's interesting though that your guess would be that's what most people would say, but that's not what you would say. Uh,
I think I'm paid pretty well, frankly,
yeah.
for what I do. But also, I might be a unique person in that I don't have a lot of expenses to deal with. I'm in a particular place where I'm doing all right. Because, yeah, you'll hear the arguments like, I went to college and I have a bachelor's in something and a master's in this, and I'm getting paid X, and then I'm happy about it. I'm like, well, part of me would say, well, if that's an issue, use that education to go get something that makes you more money. There's a reason that people are drawn to education. A lot of the people like the relationships and such, but and they're willing. Then I would say, if that's why you like the profession, then you got to be willing to make that sacrifice and get what you feel is not that much money.
And like you said, with all that time off, there's an opportunity in some of that time off to go do something with those 180 days not in the office to
Yeah.
potentially go earn more if that's what you so choose.
Which is
So,
something. So what I did, and just before that, my brother, when he first started teaching, he would paint houses in the summer. So
okay.
he made some extra money doing that. But I had a prior job at a Japanese restaurant and made a lot of friends. Occasionally, if they needed me on a Friday night, I would go work a Friday or Saturday night during the school year. And then in the summer, I would work, 3 nights a week just
Okay.
to earn some extra cash. So there are opportunities out there. And almost everybody has previous jobs, or there are jobs out there if you want to go make more. And I did it. It wasn't even so much about the money, but just like seeing my old friends again and working at a great restaurant. So
Awesome. And knowing
yeah.
what you know now, like, would you still go down this teaching path? If you could go back 17 years ago and have a conversation with your younger self, would you say, yep, teaching is going to be just fine for you?
To myself, I would probably still do it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine because I've thought about it over the years. You have a bad year, and I'm like, man, I could just go back and be an engineer or whatever.
Yeah.
And but then I have friends who are engineers and like, ugh,
Yeah.
so and not only do they say, ugh, maybe they make more money than me, they don't make enough more money than me for me to make that switch. When I'm sitting around for 2 months in the summer enjoying the Seattle sunshine and they're going into work, just like
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And last question, anything else you think is valuable or fun or worth sharing to folks who are early in their career or maybe thinking about becoming a teacher or anything else that maybe you said, but it's so important that maybe it's worth re-highlighting and saying it one more time.
you need to practice letting things go,
Mm.
like prioritize things, what deserves all of your energy, figure out where to put your focus and save your energy for that. Let things go, especially with kids. Kids are going to say terrible things to you. You're going to hear some terrible stuff and you need to just let that go.
Yeah.
Same thing with parents. You need to be able to let stuff go. If you let things build, hold a grudge, figure it out early and get out when you can. But you need to let things go and be easygoing about it. Otherwise, it's going to just, burn you out.
And I do remember distinctly just having some of these kids where like the emotional roller coaster of a day you'd see from one day to the next. And that was the first time, like as an adult seeing the emotional roller coaster that is of like, man, that kid is sad, angry, depressed, not having a good day. Like, did I do something? Like when they yelled at me, was that because of me? And then the next day they're happy. And all of a sudden everything's fine. I internalized that way too much that it was about me, right? And that goes to your point of just kind of letting things go. Because oftentimes, it's hard to remember what it's like to be 15 when you're 25 or 30 or 40, 50, whatever it
Yeah.
is. But yeah, oftentimes you were just in a funk and to walk
Yeah.
over the bridge the next day.
As a teenager, did you like go home and think about what a teacher said or anything? My
Yeah.
mind was not on teachers when I was in high
It-
school. It was more about other students.
Well, Lucas or Mr.
Yeah.
Gaffey, thanks so much for sharing 17 years of wisdom out there in Seattle teaching math and science. Appreciate your real world stories and teaching. Thank you.